All right, cool. All right, my name's Kevin Mack, and I'm a UI UX developer at Cardinal Solutions. I work on large scaling applications. To keep me on track, I have an outline slide, which I want to make sure that there's some takeaways. I want to make sure that you understand what a clear definition of what a style guide is, what they contain, what they are and what they aren't, and what really makes a good style guide. So again, a digital style guide is one of my favorite things to really talk about. And there's two different really approaches to building a style guide. There's a global style guide that you build and it extends across all your applications. And then there's a single application style guide. And this is in the digital sense. So talking about making one for a web-based application, so HTML and CSS. And the global ones are far-reaching for multiple projects, and it involves a lot more politics and a lot more thought, but you're thinking about not just building a component for one use, but multiple uses across all your different applications that you have out there. And a single application style guide is where you build one for a single application. Makes kind of sense. Style guides are also their own project, whether or not it's a global style guide or for an individual project. So they're seen as kind of their own project within a project. So getting into a definition of a style guide, and they're really just design patterns and individual UI components or interface components that make up other components. So combining smaller pieces to make bigger pieces and really focusing around the different content that you have out there. They contain styles and markup, and they're built in HTML and CSS, and they're a visual representation of what you're actually building. So it's not just a big techie list of HTML code, but it's actual reference to components that you can utilize and use from one project to another. In addition to that, they actually have reference to code, so someone can go in there, see the visual representation of the components, copy and paste it, and use it on different applications. And one of the most important pieces that a lot of people overlook when they're building out a style guide is the documentation. So not just documentation on implementation guides, but also documentation for how you can utilize it, making sure that they're aligned with the brand and use cases for the individual components. A really good style guide contains different modified versions and variants, and they're around different contextual factors, especially around responsive web design. So when you build out a component, you're not just thinking of it as a static component, and you're thinking about it across from small devices to large devices. If there's other enhancements that are available, how will it adapt to when these different factors and variables are there? To kind of show you an example of what I mean, here's kind of an interface. This is showing a two-column kind of grid here at the bottom, and then off to the right is a mobile version. So when you're building out a style guide, when you're kind of looking at your different components that you have out there, you need to start thinking about them in different contexts. So there may be a kind of a grid system that's a two-column by two-column grid on the desktop, but when you go to mobile, it goes to a single column in different rows. But then there's also times where you may want to make this be two-column on desktop and then also two-column on mobile. So there's different ways of approaching these, and when you're building out these different components, you want to make sure that you're fulfilling all the needs in the different contexts of them. One of the big things when I'm really a broken record when I talk about style guides and also a lot of large scaling applications, one of the things I say a lot is creating scalable, maintainable projects. So making sure that it can be far-reaching for multiple applications, as well as maintainable, not just for referencing the code, but how that project can kind of grow over time and evolve as the brand evolves. And then making it be flexible for all the different needs of the content. So making sure that it's scalable. One of the things that we do is we do something called a stress test. So we build out these individual components, and then we throw in our minimum amount of characters and our maximum amount of characters inside of each component, and we test them to make sure that they're going to work in the worst restraints that we have. So what is inside of a style guide? There are a bunch of different pieces that could go in there, but the core pieces of a style guide are really your branding. And the branding, kind of the shift from the traditional PDF, JPEG, referencing, and moving away from print and getting more into digital, you're going to evolve your brand for the web and making sure that it's going to work around different components. One of the examples I always like to give is like the color cyan or an aqua color and how it looks printed versus how it looks on the web. And at Cardinal Solutions, one of our colors is this blue color. And when we print it off, it's kind of like a dark blue, but then on the web, it's this really bright blue. So we've been having discussion about, do we make our digital blue align with more of our printed materials and our t-shirts that we have, or do we keep them separate, or do we try to find paint that matches one or the other? So that's one of the discussions that we have to have when dealing with digital and also bring the branding there. Typography, which is like your sizes for font, and a really good interface is all about consistency, especially with type from different sections of your site, and deeper you get inside the experience. So these are all your header types for your page headers, page subheaders, article headers, section headers, and the stylings for those. Call to actions are buttons, anchors, anything that someone's going to interact from going from one page to another page or interacting with the actual experience. Media treatments are focused on imagery as well as video and how you're going to be integrating inside your application. And these could be background images, inline images, a lot of crazy things, as well as responsive images. Form elements, you can't really build out a true website or an interface without form elements, so building out all those different components of those. List items is not really that fun or exciting to talk about, but it's definitely one of those things that you need to build out inside of a style guide and represent how it can be implemented inside your interface. Structural, which are kind of your grid, tabular data, and how you're going to put the content in these different components together. One of the big ones that is always put into a style guide are like those global containers and what happens, or setting the max width for your web page, and then having those questions like, what happens once I get past my max width? What do I do? Do I continue scaling up, or does it stay centered in the page? It's just all about how you're going to be structuring the content and all the different components. Navigation, this is one of those ones that at a global level, they're helpful to have in there, but they're more about the strategy around navigation. And they're almost more of implementation guides, because navigation is going to be more custom based off of each application use. The only time that you can create a navigation that's going to be similar from one application to another is if the navigation doesn't change, or if you have the same character count from your global nav, which is very rare to happen. But inside of a style guide, it's more about the strategy for navigation and how you can implement it and kind of extend it. And your utility classes and helpers. And these are probably a little bit more techy and a little bit more nerdy, but these are the pieces that are used to extend an interface or a component and make them kind of unique for however you're implementing them. A really good example of this is, or a simple example of this is like your center align, left align, right align, and how you can apply it to a component to really just change the alignment of it. But most important is the actual front end architecture. And for a style guide to be really successful, you can't just bring in your average front end developer. It needs to be someone that really understands the interface and building it across different landscapes, as well as the experiences that are associated within it. A good style guide is usually full of a lot of methodologies and approaches. I could do definitely a full talk on those, but those are things like BEMS, Macks, CSS or IT CSS, and it's just different ways of crafting your actual code to make sure that it is scalable, flexible to meet the needs. So kind of getting into an example of what a style guide is. This isn't going to be an actual style guide. What I wanted to do to kind of avoid the conversation about different frameworks and tools that you can use or utilize to build out a style guide, I just kind of put some components together. So before we actually build out a style guide, we do a bunch of different things here at Cardinal, and one of them is to kind of dissect the design and identify all the different components that are inside an interface. So if I'm working with a brand, I'm not looking at just that application, but I'm looking at all their different applications that they have out there and indexing all those core components that are available out there. And I kind of start with that list that I put up there and then find those unique ones for the experience. So I usually create a document that's kind of just this free-floating document. They're referred to as element collages, and it's just an index of all of the different components that are out there. So it's your things like your colors, your header treatment, some of the paragraphs, the list, the CTAs, the form fields, some different components, image treatments, and some navigation ideas. So from there, we then develop them into code and write them in HTML and CSS and kind of put them into different platforms and tools, such as Pattern Lab or Fabricator. From there, once we have these kind of identified and built out, we can start kind of playing and refining them as they grow and mature. And once we have them in a good spot, we can combine them and create different pages. And this has been a really, really great way to get to speed of market, turn around websites and designs and concepts that are actually in the right medium that they're supposed to live in. So we're designing and developing kind of in the browser because that's where the actual output's going to live. They're going to live in the browser. So it doesn't really make too much sense for us to be just doing it in Photoshop or Sketch or whatever design program we decide. So by doing this, you can combine the different pieces and make pages. And then it's really easy to make modifications and variants of it and make alternative pages. So again, this is just kind of a quick little example of showing how it can be extended out there. So I could talk all day long about like the positives of building out style guides, but there's a lot of things that they can't solve, and they're not necessarily the easiest things to build. And I've been doing this on pretty much all my projects over the past maybe 5-6 years. And with that, I've learned a lot, as well as my voice cracks. But one of the hardest thing is you do really need a quality front-end developer that understands the UI and building out something that is scalable. One of the other big things that you always get into is the politics. So if you're building out a global style guide, you have to have sign-off from your marketing group, your UX group, your IT group, the different platforms that you have, the limitations and capabilities of them, making sure that everyone has sign-off. It's not the same thing as doing like a traditional brand guide where it was always owned by the marketing group, because a lot of people have say in here. And then the technology to actually implement it and develop it takes a kind of an advanced level of front-end skills. There's a little meme. So just kind of ending and wrapping up here, there's 3 points for what makes a good style guide. As I said, this is a much longer talk, but trying to squeeze in as much as possible without hopefully confusing people. So a good style guide, I would say it supports multiple platforms. So you're not just building it for one application, you're looking at all the limitations and capabilities across all your brand's applications that are web-based. It contains detailed documentation, and this is one of the things that a lot of people always skip over and do kind of poorly, but this is what really sets apart a good style guide, is the implementation guides as well as the use cases for them. And lastly, they need to be really easy to use, and not just by developers, but designers. And if a style guide's actually done really well, someone without actual development skills or understanding of what makes a good interface or what makes a bad interface can go in there, reference it, copy and paste it, and build out pages that are actually going to work. So that's all I have. And I have one little quick shout out, which I feel like I'm getting cut off here. But I'm doing a presentation here next week. It's actually a week from today. It's all about redesigning your website. And it's not necessary, it's about what makes your website, what isn't working on your website, and how I can make it better. And it's under 3 different points of the technology side, the data side, and the user experience side. So it should be a really fun talk and a lot of takeaways from that. So thank you for your time.